Breath of the Wild is an absolutely amazing game. While I may have had mixed feelings about the game when I first played it, due to the various changes made to the series' core gameplay, I eventually grew to love the game. In fact, I consider Breath of the Wild to be one of my favorite games of all time. For the last few weeks, I've been replaying Breath of the Wild for the first time, this time on Master Mode. As I've been exploring the vastness of Hyrule, I've thought a lot about all the things I love about this game, as well as all the things I either don't like or think could be improved. The list of things I love vastly outweighs the things I don't, but with Breath of the Wild 2 due out at some point in the future, I thought it would be a good idea to hone in on the areas of the game I'd like to see improved. Some of these improvements are simply ways of upgrading existing game systems that work fine in Breath of the Wild, while others are actual changes to certain gameplay mechanics. So, without further ado, here are 5 improvements or changes I'd like to see in Breath of the Wild 2. The weapon system is one of the biggest changes that was made in Breath of the Wild. In most other Zelda games, you start out with a single sword that you use until you eventually upgrade to the Master Sword. Some games have additional swords, such as the Bighorn Sword and Ocarina of Time, but as a general statement, you play each game with 1 or 2 unbreakable weapons. Breath of the Wild does away with this system in favor of one with significantly more weapons that all break after a certain amount of use. This variety of weapons includes short swords, claymores, spears, pitchforks, even tree branches. The game wants you to scavenge for weapons as opposed to giving you a single weapon that won't break. While the Master Sword can still be found in the game, it is susceptible to the durability mechanic found in every other weapon. The sword will never technically break, but it will run out of energy and require time to recharge. I'll admit, I was not a fan of the system when I first started playing. I thought weapons broke way too easily and didn't do enough damage. As I progressed through the game and discovered better weapons that hit harder and lasted longer, my opinion of the system started to change, especially once I learned I could expand my weapon inventory with Korok Seeds. Once I had a collection of more powerful and more durable weapons, I started to really enjoy the different combat styles and scavenging for new weapons once mine broke. I learned where I could always find some of the best weapons in the game so I could make supply runs whenever my weapon inventory ran low. Since finally coming around to the weapon system, I've had a couple ideas on how it can be improved in the sequel. Adding some sort of crafting, repair, or enhancement mechanic to weapons would add a lot more depth to the system. When I first started playing, I thought I would be able to repair my weapons or enhance them with the various gems I found throughout the world. I held on the weapons I liked that were about to break in the hope I could fix them somewhere. When I collected gems and read their descriptions about containing the power of fire and water, I started envisioning swinging around a flaming sword. Eventually, I realized there was no way to repair my weapons or enhance them with gems. So, I threw my almost broken weapons against a wall and sold all my gems. I did, however, find a flaming greatsword, so my dream of setting enemies on fire with my sword was eventually realized. But how cool would it be if you could actually craft a weapon like that yourself? You could collect rubies and materials from Death Mountain to create a flaming arsenal of weapons. Or you could collect snow from the Hebra Mountains and create your very own Frostblade. You could even use certain materials to add attributes to your weapons, such as increased durability or increased attack power. The possibilities are very exciting to think about, and I hope to see something like this added in Breath of the Wild 2. Breath of the Wild's approach to abilities is a little different from in previous games. In the past, you would acquire a variety of tools throughout your adventure that would be used to solve a wide range of puzzles or defeat certain enemies. In Breath of the Wild, these abilities are all given to you at the start of the game, and there aren't as many of them as in previous games. Part of the game's charm is how these abilities allow you to interact with the environment. While they are still used to solve puzzles, they can also be used to traverse the environment and mess around with your enemies. The game encourages you to be innovative with how you apply the few tools that it gives you. For the sequel, I'd like to see additional abilities or tools added to the game. I'm fairly certain this will happen, as I can't imagine Nintendo releasing a sequel to this game with the same abilities and nothing new. I expect the Paraglider to return, as well as the Sheikah Slate and its runes, or at least something similar to the Sheikah Slate. What I want to see are some new abilities or tools added to this existing arsenal. They can be used to solve new types of puzzles, traverse the environment in new ways, or both. One idea I had was to bring back an item from previous Zelda games, the Claw Shot. This item would be a lot of fun to use when traversing the environment, especially when climbing mountains. You could maybe use it in mid-air and slow time like you do when shooting your bow. Whatever ends up being added, I think the sequel will benefit from some new toys to play with. The open format of Breath of the Wild is one of my favorite aspects of the game. Being able to go anywhere and do anything in any order you want is very appealing to me. It allows you to play the game the way you want to play, and results in unique gameplay experiences for each person. Adding mechanics like the paraglider and climbing opens the game up even further, allowing you to explore in ways that simply weren't possible in previous Zelda games. My only issue with this open format is how it affects Hyrule Castle. The castle is the location of the final boss, and it's meant to be the hardest area with the hardest enemies. It's meant to be the ultimate test in the game and serve as the culmination of all your efforts. Yet, you can access this area as soon as you get the paraglider at the start of the game. You can decide to head straight to Hyrule Castle and challenge Ganon within the first hour of playing the game. This would be a poor choice as you are ill-equipped at the start of the game. However, it's still fairly easy to get into the castle at a low level. In my efforts to get the Hylian shield early in the game, I was able to get as far as the library in the castle with fairly little difficulty. I barely had any weapons and I only had 1 extra heart and 1 stamina vessel, yet I was still able to venture deep into Hyrule Castle. When I left, I had many high-level weapons, shields, and bows beyond the Hylian shield I had gone there to find. If I had wanted to, I probably could have challenged Ganon at that point, even with only 4 hearts. To me, this sort of trivialized Hyrule Castle and Ganon. What am I working towards if I can access the final area and final boss at the start of the game? The rest of the game may be tons of fun, but it's almost like you're ignoring Zelda by going off and doing everything else when you can access the castle at any point. To me, it would have made a lot more sense if you were unable to access Hyrule Castle until you had freed all of the Divine Beasts. The game could still have retained its open format and just limited that one area. This gives you something to work towards as you explore the world. I understand that I can choose not to go to the castle until I'm ready, which is exactly how I play. It just feels weird that the final area is accessible so early in the game. For the sequel, I'd like to see the final area and final boss, whatever they end up being, be inaccessible until you have completed the other main objectives. Additionally, I would like the final area to be more difficult to get through. As I mentioned earlier, it was too easy for a low-level Link to get far into Hyrule Castle. The final area is meant to be the culmination of everything in the game, and its challenges need to reflect that. When I first beat the game, it felt fairly anticlimactic going through the final area and fighting Ganon. Making these changes to the end of the game would be a welcome improvement for me. Speaking of anticlimactic, I thought most of the boss fights in the game were fairly anticlimactic. The Hinox and Talus fights were way too easy, and the bosses of each Divine Beast were also fairly easy. I honestly had more difficulty fighting high-level minions than I did fighting most of these bosses. I can defeat the Hinoxes before they even have a chance to attack, and the Taluses aren't much tougher. Now, I understand, this is The Legend of Zelda and not Dark Souls. Bosses in a Zelda game should be nowhere near as difficult as a Dark Souls boss. It's just that many of these fights did not really last very long and were over before I could really get into them. Some of them had really cool gimmicks that I wanted to see more of. I especially liked the Windblight Ganon fight as it allowed for some really cool aerial combat, but that fight, just like most of the others, was over way too quickly. When I have more trouble fighting 2 white moblins than I have fighting a Divine Beast boss, it makes the boss fight feel anticlimactic. All I ask for in the sequel is that they make boss fights last longer. Whether that's adding more gimmicks and abilities to their arsenal or simply giving them a larger health pool, I just want these boss fights to feel more epic and challenging. The last improvement I'd like to see in Breath of the Wild 2 is a recipe book for the cooking system. In Breath of the Wild, you need to scavenge food the same way you need to scavenge weapons. The game allows you to cook different food items together to create a wide variety of dishes, including salted steaks and apple pie. You can also cook certain items with monster parts to create elixirs that give you different attributes, such as flame resistance and increased movement speed. Part of the fun is mixing different combinations of ingredients together to discover new recipes. Unfortunately, there is no menu in the game that shows you all the recipes that you've made. The closest thing the game has to this is the ability to select a dish or elixir in your inventory and see the recipe that made it. However, once you've consumed the item, you can no longer see the recipe. Some recipes are easy to remember, but others have multiple different items that need to be collected. There are a lot of different recipes in the game, many of which are for the same item. While you could write them all down yourself or look them up online, I think it would be really cool if they added a recipe book to the game so you can keep track of all your experiments and creations. Thanks for watching. I'm really enjoying my second playthrough of Breath of the Wild. Nintendo really created a masterpiece this time around, and I'm excited to see what they do for the sequel. I'd like to see some of these changes and improvements make it into the next game, but honestly, if they just resold me the same game with a new story, I'd be perfectly fine with that.